Hello, you are listening to Germantown Community Radio at WGGT-LP 92.9, or more likely on our website, gtownradio.com. I am Vilnius Chukars, and though I am a Philadelphia native and regular G-Town listener, this program is coming to you with recordings from Baltimore's Loyola University Maryland History Club, which I am a member. Our club meets weekly to dive into histories of all sorts, but as this month is Women's History Month, the narratives of women throughout world history have been our focus. For this month, we also thought it would be fun to share our conversations and presentations beyond the confines of our own on-campus meetings and to the public through the power of community radio. This week, you'll hear narratives about various Irish women from our St. Patrick's Day meeting. We'll talk about their lives, actions, and the movements they were a part of. Now, I'll let our club president Maeve transport us to the Humanities Building of Loyola and get things started.
Anyway, hi. Continuing Women's History Month and intersecting with today's actual holiday, which was, as a reminder, invented in the 1920s to win poor Irish immigrant votes, we are talking about women of Irish history, which is a subject that is of interest to me, but is also kind of pertinent to just the institution that we're at currently, just because it is a Jesuit university and as such is intertwined with the Catholic faith. And as a result is intertwined with a heavily Catholic country, but we will get there. Anyway, point being that I'm going to start off with Constance Gore-Booth, which I'm going by her maiden name simply because, I won't lie, I was a little bit thrown off because she married a Polish-Ukrainian guy, so her married name is very Polish-Ukrainian. But yeah, she was the founder of the Cumnaban, and my Gaelic pronunciations are going to be what they are. She was born to a Anglo-Irish explorer, a former Arctic explorer, which, coolest parent ever. Like, that's just a cool parent thing to do. Be like, oh yeah, my dad looked for the Northwest Passage or whatever. Crazy. But point being that she and her sister Eva were encouraged by their father to take an interest in the poor because he was a landholder in County Sligo, which is sort of along what is now the border between the Republic of Ireland and the province of Northern Ireland. And during the famine, because she was born sort of in the midst of it, he actually very intentionally gave food to his tenants, which was not necessarily commonplace. So, yay! But yeah, his name is Sir Henry Gore-Booth, and essentially she, by virtue of her socioeconomic station, was given the opportunity to go to art school, and that's where she began to get involved in politics. So she joined the National Union of Women's Suffrage Societies while at art school. This is also where she met that Polish-Ukrainian husband we were talking about, so kind of funny how old resistances are kind of overlapping with new resistances. Interesting. But point being, they got married, they settled in Dublin, and by 1903 she was kind of getting herself embedded into the artist scene in Dublin, which was incredibly prolific. In fact, if any of you know William B. Yeats, he actually wrote a poem that was sort of an ode to the charitable work of her and her sister Eva, so very cool. So, in 1916, for 6 days, the Citizen Army and various other Republican factions staged a rising in response to British conscriptions to fight in the First World War, which was very much seen as a rich man's war, which it was, because it was essentially inbred cousins throwing bombs at each other, with, several million casualties in between. The point being that this was, and has been since the beginning of the 20th century, a highly urban guerrilla conflict. So if you think about other, for instance, famous battles like the retaking of Warsaw towards the end of the Second World War, or the Battle of Stalingrad, point being that this was not what you would imagine typical combat to be like, and as a result, the vast majority of the deaths from those 6 days of combat between British, essentially the Royal Constabulary, and the various Republican forces resulted primarily in civilian deaths, which isn't to say that actual armed combatants did not die. It was just that the vast majority were civilians, because there was an inherent assumption that anyone who was present in the city was involved somehow. So in May of that same year, 16 of the Republican leaders were very publicly executed in an effort to make a stance, and also many other people were arrested, including Constance. And initially the court wanted to sentence her to death because they were very much trying to bring down the hammer of justice onto what they saw as a rebelling party. That sentence was later commuted to life in prison. It's funny how that whole life in prison thing did not last very long. Like, she was out of prison by 1917, which is remarkable. And in 1919, she actually became the first woman to be elected to the British House of Commons, just in general. At the time, all of Ireland had various districts that were meant to be represented in the House of Commons. However, by this point, she had signed up with Sinn Féin, and the policy that they had at the time was that were any of their members to be elected, it was their opinion that that was not a governing body that had any legal claim to them or to their land. So she did not take up her seat, but that doesn't change the fact that she still was the first woman elected. Suck it, Thatcher. I'm just kidding. We still, I guess, endorse successes. But in a more officially recognized body, she would serve as the first Minister of Labour in the Second Dáil, which is the lower house of the Oireachtas. So similar to the British parliamentary system, there are two houses. Well, I suppose, and similar to our own constitutional system, there are two houses. Lower, upper, typically, one more even representative, one more population-based, etc. Also of note, the only reason she actually was elected at the first assembly of the Oireachtas, but she was in jail at the time, so she couldn't take up her seat. So, unfortunately, she had to take up her seat in the next election. By 1922, the First World War was long since over, and the Anglo-Irish Civil War had officially broken out. And during this time, she led the IRA's Dublin Brigade in a very intentional campaign, because she was, in addition to being the Labour Minister, a minister of one particular region of Dublin. It was sort of divided into like 4 big quadrants of the city. And so she was sort of on the front lines helping to lead in that regard, along with an organization specifically of women that she had helped to found around the same time that she had joined Sinn Féin. And by 1926, she joined Fianna Fáil, and this was also when the party was first founded. As a bit of context, this party still exists today. It is viewed in a very mixed way by contemporary Irish citizens, simply because it is a conservative party, and its policies and politicians have been criticized for being nationalist and xenophobic, especially in the wake of things like the 2011 wave of migration of people from various parts of the developing world to Europe in particular. So I can't universally condemn or condone the current actions of Fianna Fáil. I can just say that it exists and that she was part of the founding. And she continued to have a very active political career. In fact, in the intervening period between 1919 and the outbreak of the Anglo-Irish Civil War, she actually came to the U.S. to sort of campaign to drum up support. And she continued her career up until her death on July 15th of 1927. But her last name, which is Merovich, which I think I'm saying right, is attributed to several parks, several roads, benches, etc. in Ireland, England, and Ukraine, which is fascinating. Just another instance of how old resistance continues to blend into new resistance. So, unfortunately, because the political party she was a founding member of is very much still in existence today, her legacy has been fought over by various groups trying to shape it to suit the message they're trying to present. So various groups trying to promote her for her feminist achievements, for her nationalist achievements, for other aspects of her identity, essentially, are being highlighted to further a political message. And once again, the use of violence in Ireland's struggle for independence is still very much a topic of complexity, because on the one hand, there is the question of how much violence is necessary to achieve these ends, and on the other hand, there's the question of why was this violence necessary to begin with. But I would argue that the boundaries she broke for Irish women are sort of an irrefutable fact. In fact, another female MP would not be elected until 1979, which is unfortunate and yet remarkable. So yeah, this is a person I didn't know before fairly recently, but nonetheless I'm very glad to. So yeah.
Thank you, Maeve, for that excellent presentation. We will now go into a short musical intermission. That was Mon Dinka by Sinead O'Connor. We will now return to a presentation from me that will be a lot shorter than last week's. All right. I appreciate that Maeve talked some about the Rising because she provided a lot of really interesting and detailed context, and you're going to hear a couple connections in my presentation to it, except my comments about it are going to be much more, they're going to be more of a glimpse than rather an in-depth kind of conversation about them. But today I'm talking about Rosanna Rosie Hackett, born July 25th, 1893, Irish revolutionary, trade union leader, long career, born into a working class family, Dublin, 1893, said 1893 already, raised primarily by her mother in her youth. Her father died young. Hackett's career began as a packer in a paper store, then becoming a messenger, working for the Jacobs Biscuits Company, who you may have seen before. At the time, the working conditions in the factory that she was at, really poor. Factories in general, pretty poor. And she spends a considerable amount of time in these spaces from pretty early on in her life. Rosie Hackett will go on to fight for many decades, fighting for the rights of Irish workers and labor unions. Hackett joins the Irish Transportation and General Workers Union, also known as the ITGWU. I just love the WU. Just the triple on it. But when it was established first, she joins when it was first established in 1909 by Jim Larkin, one of the founders of the later created Irish Labour Party, which marked the beginning of her lifelong activity in trade unionism. Let's jump a little bit ahead to August 22nd, 1911. Right, she's with this workers' union. Hackett helps to organize the withdrawal of women's labor in the Jacobs Biscuits factory to support their male colleagues who are already on strike at this point. This being a pretty early on in this kind of in this field for a women's strike, and with the women who struck then under Hackett's guidance. With their support, the men would secure better working conditions and a pay raise. 2 weeks later, as she turns 18 years old, Hackett co-founds the Irish Women's Workers Union with Delia Larkin, related to the aforementioned Jacob Larkin. Her role in continued strikes and lockouts, though, would eventually cause her to lose her position at Jacobs in 1914. She's not going to stop pursuing these ideals of the worker union she's been a part of, though. Hackett, career change, quick here, begins to work as a clerk in the print shop in Liberty Hall, the headquarters of the Irish Citizen Army, who are a paramilitary group first formed in Dublin to defend picket lines and street demonstrations akin to the one she was already a part of the Irish Transport and General Workers Union. During the same strikes that would lose Hackett her position at Jacobs. She soon, after taking this position at Liberty Hall, will become involved in preparations for the 1916 Rising that Maeve mentioned and spoke on. Also known as the Easter Rising, working in a union shop, helping with printers and making first aid kits and knapsacks, kind of doing a jack-of-all-trades sort of position there at this moment. The 1916 Rising would occur as an armed insurrection in Ireland during the Easter week, hence the title of Easter Rising. It's launched by Irish Republicans against British rule in Ireland with the aim of establishing an independent Irish Republic while the United Kingdom was fighting during the First World War. Hackett is part of this group that printed the first proclamation of the Irish Republic, the first document which proclaimed Ireland's independence from British rule at this period. She would be in the printing room in Liberty Hall as a trusted messenger in 1916 when the proclamation was printed. Again, kind of this jack-of-all-trades position. She's pretty well respected by a lot of people in the organization, and she will personally deliver it to James Connolly, the leader of the Irish Citizens Army. She'll reminisce in later kind of memoirs about her work that she handed this proclamation off the press while it was still wet and warm in her hands. So, pretty rad. The rebellion, though, is a military failure, of course, and after surrendering, the rebels are taken to Dublin Castle, where Hackett, among many others, will be imprisoned in Kilmainham jail for 10 days. Connolly will be executed. Things A little rough for a while, but after the Rising, Hackett returned to the union which she started, and which, at its strongest, will come to organize over 70,000 women fighting for their rights in labor, in factories, in different fields. Until her retirement, she will run trade union shops, resulting in over 5 decades of active participation in the Irish trades union movement. And in 1970, her work will be awarded with a gold medal for 50 years of ITGWU membership. So, long, extensive career before she eventually passes away, July 4th, 1976. Never letting her ideals go away. So, yeah. There we are. Much shorter presentation than last time. All right, and from there we'll go into another musical intermission before hearing from another club member, Michael Berger. That was So Young by Irish family band The Corrs. Now on to Berger's presentation.
So we're going to talk about Johanna O'Donnell, they buried. We'll talk a little bit about why. We're going to talk about her. You might say, who? Good question. So yeah, we're going to talk a bit about her life, how we can connect it to history. We're going to try to tie personal history and, what we teach together, or what I was taught / had to read / spent up till 5 a.m. writing about last semester, and we'll work it out. Awesome. So some context. We're going to do what we always do during Women's History Month. We're going to start and end with men. Woo! This is actually relevant. So this guy right here is Nicholas O'Donnell. By the beginning of the 1900s, he was one of the leading figures in the Irish-Australian community in Melbourne, right? So in the state of Victoria in Australia. And I was in this class, I'll take this off, immigration class, where we had to look up an ancestor that immigrated to Australia while I studied abroad there, except problem, didn't have one of those. So I saw this guy's name on a plaque, and I was like, oh cool, I'll do him. Except he didn't emigrate from Ireland. His mother did, and his father. So I decided to do research on his mother. And I thought it would be cool to try to take some of the stuff I learned from that and bring it here. Just some context. I do regard a lot of Nicholas O'Donnell's stuff as legit, because we look yes, he was a physician, one of the best in all of Australia at the time. But he was fluent in Gaelic. He regularly conversed with his relatives in Ireland, and he was a well-regarded intellectual and familiar historian in the area. He actually did kind of fall out of favor after the Easter Uprising that we've been talking about, because he supported pro-union, pro-stay with Britain. Again, that's part of that Australian half of his identity coming in, that Aussie side. But again, there's layers to it. But that being said, while I do use his perspective, I think we're going to have some moments we're going to be like, again, this is her son talking, not her. So, just to start, Johanna Barry, her maiden name, she was born either in late 1835 or 36. And she was an early teen during the Great Famine. We've already talked a bit about it today. I won't keep hitting you on the head of it. Y'all already know about it. But her home county of Limerick was one of the hardest ones hit, right, in the south of Ireland, right? You see the statistics there. In just 20 years, that population declined by a third. So 1 in 3 either died or moved, right? So Johanna's family didn't actually have that many people die. She only had her uncle John and his 2 daughters pass away. But there is an undeniable psychological impact, because rural towns like Liscannett were hit the hardest, and that is where she grew up. So, even though she didn't die, and most of her direct family stayed, alive, she still chose to ultimately immigrate to Victoria in the late 1850s. And there's a couple reasons that, I wager that, are behind this. One is in Ireland, following the famine, there's a transition from Gavelkind inheritance to primogeniture. For the longest time in Ireland, the way succession would work is when someone would die, they would give lands to each of their sons and sometimes even their daughters. That's primocognitive. Cognitive. I don't know, words. Latin's hard.
That's why it's dead.
Exactly. Amen. But after the famine and, the potato blight, part of the issue was that sons didn't have enough lands. So their survivors often felt the need to only pass on lands to one son and encourage others to find new ventures to provide for themselves. There's also the opportunities in Australia. San Fran's not the only place with the 49ers, with gold rushes. Australia has huge ones going on at this time, right? Especially in Victoria. And there maybe is a desire to start over. The means are made available by the British government because they want people to settle Australia. People have been there for 40,000 years, but that's okay. Right? So maybe there's a desire to start over after witnessing that hardship. So she was on a several month voyage on the HMS Shalimar. As you see here, she wrote a little bit in her diary that the Captain Robertson was consistently drunk, which, you love hearing about your captain, but the ship voyage was successful. It took, as you see, about 6 months, right? This is the ship log. I pulled this from the state database in Victoria. This is her name here-ish. You also see her sister Bridget, her brother Patrick Barry, all a bunch of members from the Barry clan all went, right? Including her cousin who ended up marrying her sister because, it happened. So when she arrives, she goes to work alongside her sister Bridget, and they're domestic servants. Irish immigrant women made up probably about 80 to 90% of domestic servants in Melbourne throughout most of the late 19th century. She faced a lot of racial discrimination, very likely. Nina, ones, no Irish need apply. You all have heard it because we've had it here. Very much the case in Australia as well. Her brothers, I don't have it here, actually went to go to the gold mines right away. While they were there, they probably would have encountered a lot of Chinese immigrants as well. There's a lot of recorded instances of both Irish and Chinese miners working together and brawling. That's what happens, right? But she does get out of the city. She marries Michael O'Donnell, who her brothers end up meeting when they're all working as prison guards. This is despite the stereotype that Irish people were only criminals when, Australia. Yeah, she ends up meeting this guy named Michael O'Donnell at like one of the local Irish hangouts, and they marry in 1858, only about a year after they meet. And they immediately purchase land out in the countryside. What would be some reasons for her wanting to go to the countryside, want to get married so quickly? Do we have any ideas why? Maeve?
Accumulate generational wealth.
Yeah, absolutely, right? What could be some other reasons? Again, I'm pointing at this.
Stability and expectations that women should get married as soon as possible and pop out as many babies as possible.
Absolutely, right? Gender norms are a huge thing with this.
Farmland?
Exactly, right? I mean, this again, obviously gender norms probably played a huge role, but she's someone who grew up in the countryside. And when she moved to the city, she likely faced a ton of racial discrimination. I mean, it was everywhere in Melbourne at the time. The newspapers are filled with talking about the filthy Irish, right? So that's something that's really present in her life and maybe she wanted to get away from. And then maybe it was just economic stability, which we'll find out isn't necessarily the case when she marries Michael. She has a stillborn daughter. Obviously infant mortality is really high at this time because they're very hot Victorian summers. There's a lack of generational support. Her mom's still back in Ireland, so she doesn't have someone to help her through it. But she has two sons, David and Nick. They make it. She has John Thomas. Doesn't make it. Spoiler alert. But Nicholas, that's the son that goes on to be the doctor we talked about. About a week before July 7th in 1865, her husband Michael got hit by a branch while riding his horse home to the ranch. He was paralyzed from about the neck down. His lungs stopped working and he passed away on July 7th. About roughly a month later, her youngest son, John Thomas, passed away from scarlet fever. And this was a big deal. Now, some of the stuff I brought up earlier about we don't know, this is her son talking, not her, is her son, Nick, says she only cried once. And maybe that's something she put on the show for her son. From what we can tell, it seems the two were very close. So it seems like this must have been something that was really, something that impacted her. She did decide to not remarry, which I think is something that surprises a lot of people. But actually, at least in the adjacent colony, New South Wales, Sydney, I don't like it as much as Melbourne. It actually was fairly common in the frontier lands, right? So, but she ends up renting out the land that she had bought with Michael, right? Trying to still make revenue and provide for her sons with that. And they move closer to the towns of Melbourne and the city. But she is a survivor, right? So she relies on her close relations to her extended family. She has her cousin Pat, her sister Bridget, her sister Ellen. The list goes on. They kind of all use the same names over and over again. Hey, I'm a little Irish. I get it. But she would move a lot. But she would typically stay around what's called the Hotham borough of Melbourne. So that's like North Melbourne, West Melbourne. These are these areas that have huge Irish and Irish Australian populations throughout the 19th century, right? But she successfully manages businesses. I didn't say this before, but she was literate, which is really rare for the time and very cool. And we'll get back to why that's important. But she used the money from the land and from all the jobs she worked to pay for her son's education. She taught them regular skills. She even paid for violin lessons. Nick O'Donnell said they weren't very good at it, so I find that funny. But she ultimately provides for them. David goes on to be one of the wardens at one of the prisons. Nick goes on to be, again, that big doctor and leader that we talked about. And she spends the final years living with her siblings and in-laws, right? She dies and passes away in 1901. This is a quote from her son Nick saying that she didn't want to live. She wanted to go to her God and her husband, be buried first thing without a fuss. Again, this is her son's perspective. Maybe this isn't how she felt, but at least this is how he engaged with it. And he seemed to be somewhat close with her towards the end of her life. She, as requested, she was buried alongside her husband and John Thomas. So I was going to have another slide saying what we take away from her life. But I was going to say we're going to end with a man, and we're ending with a man. Now, Nicholas O'Donnell was only probably, if I remember correctly, about 7 or 8-ish years old at the most when his father died. Yet he went on to be really successful. He went on to be a leader in the Irish community. He spoke Gaelic. Who do we think taught him that?
His mother.
Right? And there's a lot of extra things we can talk about, right? Like we can say that obviously it was a community effort. His mom was really involved with the Irish Australian community, right? Like they probably played a role in that. But it seems that she really had an effect. Her life, I think, captures a lot of trends at the time in terms of Irish people coming for work in Melbourne, trying to get out to the countryside to accumulate that generational wealth. But also defies, some stereotypes that we have of women feeling the need to remarry. She remains the head of her household. She is a business leader. So I think her life was pretty cool, and I'm really happy that I got to engage with it. Awesome. Well, thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
That's awesome, Berger.
Appreciate it, man.
Thank you, Berger, for that incredible presentation. We will now enter another musical interlude.
My name is Chuck Stewart. I'm a canny gunman and a roving young fella I've been. So easy and free when you drink, and when me, I'm a man you don't meet every day. I have acres of land, I have men at command, I have always a shilling to spare. So be easy and free when you drink, and when me, I'm a man you don't meet every day. So come fill up your glasses of brandy and wine, whatever it costs I will pay. So be easy and free when you drink, and when me, I'm a man you don't meet every day. Took out my dog, and him I did shoot uptown in the county Kildare. So be easy and free when you drink, and when me, I'm a man you don't meet every day. So come fill up your glasses of brandy and wine, whatever it costs I will pay. So be easy and free when you drink, and when me, I'm a man you don't meet every day. So be easy and free when you drink, and when me, I'm a man you don't meet every day.
That was I'm a Man You Don't Meet Every Day, performed by the Pogues. We will now hear one last presentation coming from Club Officer Gustavo.
So, hi, I'm Gustavo. My presentation is about Bridget of Kildare. Yeah, she's a very important saint in Ireland. Also, might not have been real. I'll talk about that in a bit. It's one of the situations where it's a very early saint, so a lot of what we know about them is kind of not verifiable. But it's kind of a very fun saint too. So, yeah. So Bridget was born 451, and her mother was a slave but was baptized by St. Patrick, so she was a Christian slave. and then her father was a Leicester chieftain. So because she was born into slavery, her and her mother were sold off to, as the stories go, some like druid. I couldn't find a name for this guy, but supposedly she was sold off to some druid guy. And this is where she performs her first miracle. So apparently as a baby, this druid tried to feed her, but because he was unclean, being a pagan and all that, she threw up all the food, which seems like kind of a lame miracle, to be honest. In any case, the stories say that she would feed herself then by like drinking from a cow. Like a cow shows up apparently at some point in the story, and she feeds herself with this like mystical cow. And her second miracle is that she gave away all of the butter her mother had made to just people. This is a kind of a trend in her life. She just gives stuff out in all of her legends because she's a Christian and very charitable, much to the dismay of people who own the stuff that she's giving out. She very often gives out stuff she doesn't own. Any case, she gave away all her mother's butter, and then she prayed really hard, and it like came back. So she was able to like spawn in more butter through prayer, which is pretty cool. Any case, her custody was returned to her father, and in the story she keeps giving away his possessions to people in need. So, because she's a good Christian, obviously. And her dad, sort of fed up with her, brings her to the king of Leinster. I don't know why he would do this. Yeah. And while he's there, talking to the king, she gives her father's, like, jewel-encrusted sword to some poor guy, so that he could pay for food for his family. So it wasn't her sword, it was her father's sword. But the king is so taken aback and he's so impressed by her act of charity that he urges her father to free her from slavery. So, yeah, and then she returns to her mother, who later also gets freed from slavery. And they sell dairy together, which is nice. And then her mother tries to arrange a marriage with this bard, and because Bridget is so pious, she does not want to get married. She wants to remain like a virgin and like continue her spiritual practice. So she prays to God that she would become ugly so that no man would want to marry her.
Honestly iconic.
Yeah, that was awesome. I love all the legends related to Bridget because they're all very insane. Eventually, though, she starts sort of building a religious following, and eventually she takes vows as a nun, which is cool. And according to legend, the moment she took the vows, her ugliness was reverted. So God was making her ugly up until she became a nun, and then she could be pretty again, which is interesting. Anyways, so she starts organizing a following of like consecrated religious life for women, which was not very well developed in Ireland at the time. St. Patrick and all these guys had made monasteries and stuff, but they didn't really have a female equivalent. She becomes friends with this St. Conleth guy, which some of my sources mentioned, who was sort of this hermit who I guess kind of became her sidekick for a lot of this. And they would travel around setting up schools and setting up monasteries and churches all over Ireland. And I thought that was pretty neat. and apparently she sort of became superior general of the monasteries in Ireland, which is interesting. So according to the story, she is like the leader of the monasteries. And yeah, so according to the legend, she is sort of the founder of a lot of the Irish monastic tradition, especially for like nuns. Now, I found this one source that was really interesting that said that Bridget was sort of created to be the inventor of monastic life in Ireland by a monk from Kildare who wanted to establish a church tradition in Kildare so that he could say, like, we should be the center of the church in Ireland because this woman 100 years ago founded all of the Irish monasteries and she was from here, so our monastery should be the main one, which is interesting. There's also allegations of her really just being a reskinned Celtic goddess, that they have all of these wild stories about her, and so the idea is that maybe this was a way of monks to like appropriate this random Celtic goddess so that she could serve the efforts of the church in Ireland, and they could convert more pagans. So I don't know, it's very interesting because a lot of the sources we have for Bridget are not that clear, and they're all sort of very magical and whimsical. And I think the most comprehensive source we have of her comes like 100 years after she was supposed to have died. So it's one of those situations where it's hard to verify whether Bridget was like a real person. That being said, she has a lot of fun miracles that I'm going to talk about now. So she would multiply food and give it to like the poor, kind of like how Jesus did. She turned water into beer, which is awesome.
Yeah.
I like how the Irish were like water into wine. That's lame. Let's have her make water into beer.
Yeah.
So this is, I think, one of her more famous miracles. Apparently, she wanted to establish her monastery in Leinster, and she asked the king if she could have land for the monastery, and he's kind of hesitant, and she wagers that what if she can have all the land that is covered by her cloak? And the king is like, okay, well, your cloak does not seem that big, so I'll take this offer. You can get like 2 square feet of land, and then she has her followers grab her cloak and just stretch it over this vast field, and through the power of God, her cloak just expands to be this like massive, all-encompassing thing, and just she gets a bunch of land out of this because she had a magic cloak, which is kind of cheating. That feels a little dishonest for a servant of God to just be lying about having an expanding cloak. One time she was staying with this family who had 2 mute daughters, and then she fell off her horse and she grazed her head apparently, which is very serious. And then the children touched the blood and they became cured of their muteness, which is fascinating. Her prayers were said to still the rains and winds. That's kind of crazy. And then this last one. So it's this story that I found where this nun breached her vows and she got pregnant with a child, and Saint Bridget shows up and she's like, don't worry, I'll take care of it, and she puts her hands on the pregnant woman's belly, and apparently through prayer the fetus disappears without any pain or without like anything happening. And this just happens, which leads to a lot of questions. Where did the fetus go? What did the Irish at the time think of abortion as a concept? Because this feels I feel like today a saint you can do this as a saint today, you know? I think in the Catholic Church,
The Catholic Church is more cool with abortion now.
but yeah, and actually a lot of sources I found, apparently when Ireland was having its debates around abortion, this was a story that a lot of people like to talk about, because they were like, oh, Catholicism says it prohibits abortion. However, one of the most famous and most important Irish saints performed a magical abortion. So, yeah, I think that's pretty interesting. And then you had the clergy in Ireland being like, no, this is out of context, and you can't just say this, okay? We don't live in medieval Ireland, okay, guys? We can't just be basing our politics off of medieval folk tales, is a sentiment that I heard from like a lot of these people, or like a lot of pro-abortion clergymen from the sources that I found. So, anyways, yeah, that's it. That's all I have. So, any questions?
Thank you, Gustavo. We will now have one last musical piece before we conclude this episode of History Club on the Air.
I wish that you could make all my decisions for me. Jump in my brain and overrule, ignore me. And it's a good day for a meltdown. All my thoughts getting too loud. Wish that you could make all my decisions for me. Pick me up, take me home, turn me off, turn me on. I'm your friend, I'm your girl, I'm your little chaos. Little chaos. See, I struggle showing just how much I really love you. You can thank my mom for that. I can't promise I'll never freak out, but I'll try not be a letdown. Nothing great is ever easy. Pick me up, take me home, turn me up, turn me on. I'm your friend, I'm your girl, I'm your little chaos. Took a left, hit a nerve, took a right, hit the curve. Is there room in your life for a little chaos? If you really want me, if you really want me, if you really want me, take me as I am. If you really want me, if you really want me, if you really want me, take me as I am. If you really want me, if you really want me, if you really want me, take me as I am. Pick me up, take me on, turn me off, turn me on. I'm your friend, I'm your girl, I'm your little chaos. Pick me up, take me on, turn me up, turn me on. I'm your friend, I'm your girl, I'm your little chaos. Took a left, hit a nerve, took a right, hit the curve. Is there room in your life for a little chaos?
You just heard Irish singer Orla Gartland's Little Chaos, closing out the second and final episode of the Loyola University Maryland History Club's Women History Month radio series. We hope you learned about some fascinating women and movements from Ireland's dense history today. Thank you for listening, and thank you to G-Town Radio for hosting us on the air. We hope you have a good rest of your Thursday. Good night.